Imagine this, a sterile operating room, bright lights glaring down. A team of seasoned surgeons, their faces masked, sweat beading on their brows. And right in the center, hovering over a patient, stands a boy. Not a medical student, not an intern, but a boy whose feet barely reach the stool he's standing on. He's 7 years old. 7. His name is Arpan Sharma, and the scalpel in his hand isn't a toy. It's the tool that will save a life. You think you know impossible stories? You're about to hear the one that redefines them. This is the unbelievable, yet completely true, tale of the world's youngest surgeon. Get ready, because this is Arpan Sharma's story. The air in the village of Lahori was thick with the scent of burning wood and damp earth. It was a simple place in the heart of India, where life moved at the pace of a slow, predictable river. But in the small, crowded home of the Sharma family, something extraordinary was happening. Arpan Sharma wasn't like the other boys his age. While they chased goats and played noisy games with worn-out rubber balls, Arpan sat silently, eyes wide, watching, always watching. His father, Prakash, was the village's unofficial healer. Not a doctor with a degree, but a man who understood bones, herbs, and the way the body moved. People came to their house every day with cuts, sprains, and fevers. Prakash never turned anyone away. He worked with a quiet, focused intensity, and little Arpan was his shadow. From the moment he was big enough to sit up without toppling over, Arpan was in the room. He didn't just observe, he absorbed. He watched his father meticulously clean a wound, carefully set a broken finger, and mix a poultice from leaves gathered in the jungle. Other children would have been bored, but Arpan was fascinated. To him, the human body wasn't a mystery. It was the most intricate and captivating machine he had ever seen. Prakash, a hard-working man with hands scarred from years of labor, initially paid his son's presence no mind. He figured the boy would eventually wander off to find a stick for a make-believe sword. But Arpan didn't wander off. He started fetching things before his father even asked. "The iodine, Papa," he'd whisper, pointing to the brown bottle on the shelf. Then, the sterile gauze, not the old cotton. By the time Arpan was 5, he knew the location and purpose of every item in his father's makeshift clinic. One sweltering afternoon, a farmer rushed in, clutching his forearm. A rusty sickle had slipped, leaving a deep, ragged gash that bled freely. Prakash was caught off guard. The wound was serious. He needed to prepare a stronger antiseptic, and his focus was entirely on the man's pale face. Arpan, tiny for his age but steady as a rock, didn't hesitate. He took a clean cloth, pressed it firmly against the wound, and applied pressure exactly the way he had seen his father do countless times. "Hold this, uncle," he instructed the farmer in a surprisingly strong voice. When Prakash turned back, ready to panic, he saw his 5-year-old son, his brow furrowed in concentration, controlling the flow of blood. It was a moment that stopped Prakash cold. This was more than mimicry. This was instinct. This was the beginning of the whispers in Lahori. The whispers that spoke of a child with the hands of an old soul. A child who didn't just play doctor. He was the healer. Prakash Sharma couldn't shake the image of his 5-year-old son saving the farmer from losing too much blood. It forced him to look at Arpan not just as his child, but as a protege. He realized the boy wasn't just interested in the treatments. He was obsessed with the structure under the skin. He wanted to know why things worked the way they did. The family was poor, which meant no expensive medical textbooks or diagrams. But for Arpan, the world itself became his textbook. Prakash started showing him things differently. When they prepared a chicken for dinner, Prakash didn't just butcher it. He explained the function of the tendons, the way the joints moved, and the purpose of the major vessels. It was an impromptu anatomy lesson conducted on the kitchen floor. Arpan's eyes would light up with understanding, never with disgust. He saw precision, not gore. One day, Prakash brought home a discarded veterinary manual he'd acquired from a traveling salesman. It was old, tattered, and mostly in English, a language neither of them spoke well. But the drawings, the black and white illustrations of muscles, nerves, and organs were a treasure trove. Arpan would spend hours tracing the diagrams with his finger, memorizing the shape of the liver, the intricate pathways of the intestines, and the fragile structure of the ribcage. He began to associate the aches and pains of the villagers with these pictures. "Uncle Ram has a problem in the area of the lesser omentum," he once told his father. using the complex word for a part of the stomach he'd only seen in a drawing. Prakash was stunned. The boy was making connections a trained doctor would make. The biggest breakthrough, however, was in coordination. It wasn't enough to know where things were. He needed to be able to touch them. Prakash started giving Arpan tiny, practical tasks. He would leave a torn garment on the table and challenge Arpan to stitch it up using the finest needle and thread he had. It was a brutal test of dexterity. At first, the stitches were messy, like clumsy knots. But Arpan was relentless. He would sit for hours, his small hand working with incredible focus, until his stitches became nearly invisible, neat, and perfectly uniform. He moved from cloth to leather, and then to thin, delicate membranes from animal organs, practicing the precision needed to handle living tissue. Prakash also began to subtly introduce him to the simple surgical tools he owned: a few clamps, a scalpel used for lancing boils, and a set of forceps. He made Arpan clean them, handle them, and learn their weight and balance. Arpan learned to treat the scalpel with reverence, understanding its power to both harm and heal. By the age of 6, Arpan Sharma didn't just have a theoretical understanding of human anatomy. He had the developing hand skills of a surgical technician, all learned through the unique, simple, and demanding curriculum of a village healer's son. The rhythm of life in Lahori was shattered one cold, late evening. A terrifying sound, a screech of brakes followed by a sickening thud, cut through the usual night noises. A young boy, a neighbor's son named Vikram, had been struck by a rickshaw on the dusty road outside. When Prakash and Arpan rushed out, the scene was chaos. Vikram lay motionless, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. It was a serious, compound fracture. The bone had pierced the skin, and blood was everywhere. Panic gripped the small crowd that had gathered. In a village like Lahori, a severe injury like this was often a life-altering event. The nearest proper hospital was hours away by bumpy transport, and the trip itself could easily make the injury worse or even cause a fatal infection. Prakash knew he had to act immediately. He was a bone setter, but this was beyond a simple break. He needed to clean the wound, stop the bleeding, and stabilize the fracture without the benefit of proper anesthesia or sterile conditions. He was sweating, his own hands shaking with the weight of responsibility. "Arpan, you stay back," he ordered, his voice strained. He didn't want his son to see something so gruesome or be in the way. But Arpan didn't move. He looked at Vikram's pale face, then at the exposed white shard of bone, and his focus clicked into a mode Prakash had never seen before. It was a calm, almost icy determination. "Papa, the artery is damaged, look," Arpan said, his voice cutting through the noise like a sharp blade. He pointed to the pulsing rhythm of the blood flow. "We must clamp it first, then clean. Use the fine forceps and the strongest antiseptic." Prakash stared at his son. He was 7 years old, standing over a life-threatening injury, giving perfect instructions. The boy was right. The artery needed immediate attention. In his panic, Prakash had focused on the bone, not the flow of blood. Without a word, Prakash handed Arpan the sterilized forceps. This was it, the true test. Could the boy's theoretical knowledge translate into practical action under pressure? Arpan took the tool. His hand, though small, was steady. He leaned over the wound, his concentration absolute. The crowd held its breath. With delicate, practiced movements, he navigated the slippery, bloody tissue. He didn't fumble, didn't hesitate. With a quiet click, the fine tips of the forceps found and secured the damaged vessel. The gush of blood slowed to a manageable trickle. Prakash, deeply moved and immensely proud, took over the cleaning and initial setting of the bone, guided by Arpan's steady advice and assistance. Arpan worked beside his father, handling gauze, passing tools, and keeping the wound clear, all while giving calm, clear updates on the boy's pulse and breathing. They worked as a true surgical team. When they were done, Vikram was stable, and the immediate danger was past. The crowd that watched was silent. Then a low murmur began. They hadn't seen a village boy assist with a grave injury. They had seen a miracle unfold. This was the moment the whispers in Lahori stopped being just whispers. They became a definite statement. Arpan Sharma was a genius. He wasn't just observing his father. He was saving lives. The news of Vikram's successful stabilization spread far beyond Lahori. Villagers who had witnessed the event carried the tale to the nearest town, and from there, It traveled like wildfire on the unreliable village phone lines. People couldn't believe it. A 7-year-old boy acting with the clarity and skill of a seasoned medic during a critical, life-threatening emergency. Prakash, Arpan's father, was a simple man who wanted only quiet continuity. He worried about the attention. He knew that recognition, especially from the outside world, could be both a blessing and a curse in their insulated community. He tried to downplay the story, insisting that Arpan had only past tools and that the credit belonged to him, the experienced healer. But the truth was out there. The first person to arrive from the city was not a doctor, but a skeptical journalist named Meena. She worked for a regional newspaper and saw the story as potential sensationalism, a small village exaggerating a child's simple assistance for fame. She drove her dusty scooter into Lahri, expecting to debunk a myth. When Meena finally found the Sharma house, she saw a scene that contradicted all her preconceptions. Arpan wasn't posing or performing. He was intently focused on bandaging a woman's sprained ankle, explaining to her, in calm, measured tones, why it was crucial to keep the joint elevated. He spoke about ligaments and compression with the natural authority of a teacher, not the rehearsed answers of a child star. Meena interviewed Prakash, who spoke haltingly, trying to minimize his son's brilliance. Then she spoke to Vikram's family, who wept as they recounted how Arpan had saved their son. But it was Arpan himself who convinced her. She asked him about the most complex diagram he had ever studied. Arpan didn't mention an organ. He started talking about the nervous system, explaining how the spinal cord transmitted signals, using his fingers to draw the pathways on the dusty floor. He spoke of the medulla oblongata, a complex term for the brain stem, without stumbling. Meena realized this wasn't an exaggeration, it was a phenomenon. Her front-page story wasn't a debunking, it was a testament. The child with the golden hands, the headline screamed. Overnight, Arpan Sharma became a local legend, a point of pride, and the subject of intense curiosity across the entire region. The buzz had officially reached the city, and the simple life of the Sharma family was about to change forever. Meena's article was a sensation, but the reaction from the official medical establishment was immediate, predictable, and largely hostile. Trained doctors and surgeons, men and women who had spent decades in sterile classrooms and operating theaters, scoffed at the idea of a 7-year-old performing medical procedures. They called it a hoax, irresponsible journalism, and a danger to public health. He's a child playing with his father's tools, declared Dr. Sridhar Menon, the chief surgeon at the largest government hospital in the nearest major city, in a televised interview. Medicine is not folk magic. It is rigorous science, anatomy, and years of disciplined practice. Allowing a child to touch a patient is reckless and unethical. Prakash was heartbroken by the backlash. He had never intended for Arpan to be a public spectacle, only a helper. He started discouraging the villagers from coming, fearing that if anything went wrong, the scrutiny would destroy his family. But the people of Lahri, who had witnessed Arpan's skill firsthand, stood by him. They continued to seek his counsel, trusting the boy they had seen in action more than the distant, intimidating city doctors. The controversy only intensified when a team of skeptical medical experts, led by the aforementioned Dr. Menon, decided to travel to Lahri to conduct an informal evaluation. Their goal was simple: expose the fraud. They arrived with their expensive equipment and stern demeanor. Dr. Menon demanded Arpan identify and explain the function of obscure bones and glands, believing the boy would inevitably fail. He showed Arpan complex X-rays of injuries. Arpan, unfazed by the hostile environment, systematically analyzed the images. He correctly identified a hairline fracture in a rib cage and explained how it could lead to a pneumothorax, a collapsed lung, if not treated carefully. He used the complex medical terms naturally, explaining the risk with a simple clarity that even the village translator understood. Dr. Menon was speechless. The boy hadn't just memorized vocabulary, he understood the clinical implications. Finally, Menon gave him a test of pure dexterity. He placed a sheet of fine paper and a needle on the table and challenged Arpan to make 50 stitches, each spaced exactly 1 millimeter apart. It was a test designed for advanced surgical residents. Arpan took the needle and thread. He did not rush. His small hand moved with the controlled grace of a master craftsman. He completed the task flawlessly. When Dr. Menon measured the stitches, They were perfectly uniform. The chief surgeon, standing defeated in the dusty village clinic, had to acknowledge the unbelievable. The boy was real. The medical establishment's wall of doubt had a 7-year-old sized hole in it. Despite the forced recognition from Dr. Menon, the path for Arpan was still murky. He was a prodigy, yes, but legally and ethically, he was still a child. No hospital would allow a minor to participate in formal surgery. The debate continued in the city. Should he be trained? Should he be protected from the pressure? Fate, however, has a way of cutting through bureaucracy. It arrived in the form of a state-level political convoy that suffered a devastating accident on the highway near Lahri. Several people were seriously injured, including a high-ranking official's wife, who sustained critical internal damage and was losing blood fast. The nearest hospital, the one run by Dr. Menon, was alerted, but the traffic and distance meant a terrifying delay. A police escort brought the most critical patient, the official's wife, to the closest known medical help, the village healer, Arpan Sharma. When the ambulance doors opened, Prakash saw the severity of the injury. It was an internal bleed, requiring immediate exploratory surgery. He had basic tools, but he was a bone setter, not a general surgeon. Attempting the operation himself was almost certain to kill her. The official, desperate, noticed Arpan standing calmly by his father. "Please, I heard about your boy," he pleaded. "If he can help, if he can just stabilize her until Dr. Menon arrives, anything." Prakash looked at Arpan, who was already running through the possibilities in his mind. Arpan pointed to the woman's distended abdomen. "Papa, the splenic artery. A rupture. If we wait, she will bleed out internally. We need to open and clamp, now." Prakash hesitated for only a second. The choice was between certain death waiting for the city or a terrifying risk trying to save her in their makeshift clinic. He chose the risk. He set up the operating table, a sturdy wooden bench, and sterilized his limited tools as best he could. With the aid of the desperate official and a stunned police officer holding a lantern, Arpan and Prakash began. Arpan's small hands, guided by the diagrams and principles etched in his mind, were precise and focused. He made the initial incision, a clean, sure line. Working quickly under the flickering light, he navigated the abdominal cavity. He found the source of the bleeding, a torn artery near the spleen. In that dark, chaotic village setting, a 7-year-old boy, with the steadiest hands in the room, clamped the ruptured vessel. The bleeding stopped. When Dr. Menon and his team finally arrived hours later, expecting a tragedy, they found the patient stabilized, the wound properly sutured, and a small boy standing quietly beside the operating bench. Arpan hadn't just stabilized her. He had performed a life-saving, emergency laparotomy and ligation. This time, there were no doubts, no scoffing, just stunned respect. Arpan Sharma had saved a life that was already considered lost, and in doing so, he had surgically cut through the red tape of the medical world. The successful emergency surgery on the official's wife was the defining moment for Arpan Sharma. It wasn't just a local success, it was a political one. The gratitude of the high-ranking official turned into powerful sponsorship. Suddenly, the medical community, which had been so resistant, was forced to integrate the prodigy. Dr. Menon, humbled by the incident in the village, became Arpan's most unexpected advocate. The official arranged for Arpan to be privately mentored at Dr. Menon's prestigious city hospital. It was a massive leap from the dusty, dimly lit clinic of Lahri to the gleaming, sterile environment of a modern operating suite. The change was overwhelming. For Arpan, the city was a sensory overload. The noise, the lights, the crowds, it was all too much. But the hospital? That was paradise. He devoured the new environment. The operating room, with its advanced equipment and precise protocols, was the ultimate workshop. He finally had access to real textbooks, high-tech imaging scans, and cadaver labs, though his participation was strictly limited to observation and demonstration of technique. The mentorship was highly irregular and kept mostly quiet. Arpan was not a student. He was an observer and a demonstrator of extraordinary innate skill. He spent his days watching complex surgeries, often standing on a custom-made stool so he could see over the table. The senior surgeons initially treated him like a mascot, but that quickly changed when they saw him interact with the procedures. During one complex cardiac bypass surgery, the lead surgeon encountered unexpected bleeding due to a fragile vessel. Tension rose in the room. Arpan, observing the monitors, calmly pointed to a slight discoloration on the digital scan they were referencing. Sir, the pressure gauge is fluctuating. The vessel wall looks weak further down, he whispered, his voice clear and steady despite the whirring machines. The surgeon, skeptical but pressed for time, glanced at the image Arpan indicated. The boy was absolutely right. The weak point was microns away from where the surgeon was working. A minor adjustment in the procedure saved a major, potentially fatal complication. From that moment, the surgical team stopped seeing him as a child novelty. They saw him as an indispensable third pair of eyes, backed by a mind that processed anatomy at lightning speed. Arpan Sharma had left the village of whispers and entered the bright lights of medical reality, proving he belonged there not by age, but by talent. Life inside the hospital became a structured routine for Arpan. He was given a tiny corner office, more of a study room, where he pored over massive medical texts. He had to keep up with traditional schooling, which he found incredibly tedious, but his heart belonged to the surgical wing. The greatest challenge wasn't the material, it was the psychological pressure and the physical constraints. Arpan was still a very small boy. He often had to use a specially built, adjustable stool to reach the necessary height over the operating table. The team jokingly called it the pediatric platform. Dr. Menon and his senior team worked tirelessly to integrate Arpan's unique abilities within the ethical and legal boundaries. They started him on highly controlled, non-critical procedures that required extreme precision but involved minimal risk. He began practicing microsurgery on dead tissue and then, under intense supervision, on laboratory animals. His hands, already steady from years of practicing sutures, proved exceptionally adept at navigating the delicate work required for nerve or vascular repair. One of his first permitted, low-risk procedures involved repairing a complex tendon injury in a young man's hand. It required dozens of nearly microscopic stitches to reattach the frayed fibers. The lead surgeon hovered over him, ready to take over at the slightest tremor. Arpan worked for 2 uninterrupted hours. He didn't speak, he only breathed. The movements of his fingers, magnified by the surgical scope, were like watching a master weaver at work. The result was perfect. The senior staff started noting his unique advantage. His small hands and fingers could reach tight spaces within the human body that required complex manipulation with standard tools. Where a fully grown surgeon might struggle with large, bulky instruments, Arpan's delicate touch allowed him to navigate with less trauma to the surrounding tissue. However, the pressure was immense. Arpan rarely smiled. He missed the simple, predictable life in Lahori. His mother often visited, bringing him simple home-cooked food and worried reassurances. She noticed the lack of play, the absence of childhood. Arpan, though, would simply point to a diagram of the heart or a complex surgical knot he had mastered. "I am helping, Ma," he would say. "This is what I am meant to do." For him, the scalpel wasn't a burden, it was a destiny. As Arpan's unofficial apprenticeship deepened, so did the international attention. Mina, the journalist who broke the initial story, continued to follow his progress, now filing reports for major international news agencies. The headline "7-year-old surgeon mentored in India" went global. The world reacted with a mix of awe and moral outrage. Critics argued that exploiting a child's genius was child labor, stripping him of his right to a normal childhood. Supporters argued that stifling such a profound, life-saving talent was a crime against humanity. The hospital's ethics board met weekly to debate his continued involvement. Meanwhile, Arpan continued to excel. His breakthrough opportunity came when a visiting international surgical team arrived at the hospital for a complex, highly specialized tumor removal. The tumor was located precariously close to a major nerve cluster, and even the most experienced surgeons were worried about causing permanent paralysis. During the preoperative briefing, Arpan, who had studied the scans for hours, pointed to a specific, unusual angle on the MRI. "If the approach is made from this superior lateral angle," he explained, pointing with a pencil, "we can use the gap between the third and fourth vertebrae. It is a tighter path, but it will allow for minimal retraction of the nerve bundle." The renowned foreign surgeon, initially annoyed by the presence of a child, looked closer at the scan and the suggested angle. He realized Arpan was proposing a technically superior, though incredibly difficult, approach. one that would require the smallest, steadiest hands imaginable. The surgeon looked at Arpan, then at Dr. Menon. A decision was made. Arpan would prepare and assist the lead surgeon on the final, most delicate phase of the procedure, the actual separation of the tumor from the nerve cluster. Under the glare of global media attention, though the operation itself was private, Arpan stepped up to the table. His moment had arrived. The world wasn't just watching the surgery, it was watching history being made by a 7-year-old boy. The operating room was silent. The only sound the steady beeping of the monitoring equipment and the soft instructions of the international surgeon, Dr. Alastair. The patient was prepped, the tumor site exposed, and now came the most dangerous part, the careful separation of the mass from the delicate network of nerves that controlled the patient's movement. Dr. Alastair had made the initial, broader cuts. Now, he stepped back slightly, gesturing toward Arpan, who was already positioned on his custom stool. The boy, barely tall enough to see comfortably, adjusted his loupes, special magnifying glasses, and took the surgical microknife. This was the moment of truth. Arpan's heart, despite his calm exterior, hammered against his ribs. He knew the gravity of the situation. One slip, one tremor, and the patient could be permanently disabled. But as his eyes focused through the magnification, everything else, the cameras watching from the observation deck, the high-profile surgeons, the weight of the world's attention, faded away. There was only the tissue, the tumor, and the scalpel. He began. His movements were incredibly economical. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. He used the tip of the microknife to gently tease apart the tissue, creating an almost invisible line of separation between the tumor and the nerve fibers. He wasn't relying on strength, but on flawless fine motor control and deep spatial awareness. Dr. Alastair, watching over Arpan's shoulder, later said it was like watching a hummingbird draw a portrait, small, fast, and unbelievably precise. At one point, the suction tube momentarily blocked his view of a critical, tiny vessel. Dr. Alastair reached out to adjust the tube, but Arpan's hand shot out, stopping the senior surgeon with a firm, silent gesture. Arpan waited for a beat, shifted his weight slightly, and then used the very edge of the knife to gently push the vessel aside, clearing his own line of sight without requiring outside intervention. He had complete control of the field. After what felt like an eternity, Arpan made the final, clean cut. The tumor was free. The relief in the operating room was palpable, but Arpan remained composed until the tumor was removed, the bleeding controlled, and the incision closed. The operation was a success, and the patient had full motor function afterward. At the age of 7 years and 5 months, Arpan Sharma had executed a critical, life-saving maneuver that seasoned professionals had deemed too risky for themselves. This was the history-making cut that officially crowned him the world's youngest surgeon. The news of the successful surgery exploded globally. The international media descended on the hospital like a flock of hungry birds. Arpan was plastered across every news channel and newspaper. He became a symbol of Indian ingenuity, a testament to human potential, and a flashpoint for debate. The fame, however, brought profound isolation. The hospital, in an effort to protect him from the relentless glare, assigned him full-time security and confined his interactions. His days were a rigid loop: observation, study, school tutoring, and highly controlled surgical practice. There was no time for bike riding, playing with friends, or simply being a child. His simple village family struggled with the attention. Prakash and his wife were immensely proud, but deeply worried. They missed their son, the boy who used to help them fetch water and chase away stray dogs. Now he lived in a world of complex terminology and immense responsibility. They felt disconnected from the genius he had become. The media storm took a toll on Arpan, too. While he loved the science, he hated the cameras. He grew tired of being asked, "How does it feel to be a genius?" He just wanted to focus on the next scan, the next procedure. He became quiet, communicating mostly in medical jargon and concise instructions. One evening, Dr. Menon found Arpan in his small study, not looking at a book, but staring out the window at the distant city lights. "A lot of pressure, isn't it, Arpan?" Dr. Menon asked gently. Arpan nodded, his shoulders slumped. "They see the surgeon, Dr. Menon. They don't see the boy who just wants to read about the cerebellum." He paused. "And sometimes, I miss the sound of the frogs in Lahri." Dr. Menon understood. The medical community had gained a prodigy, but the world had lost a childhood. The doctor realized his responsibility extended beyond training the surgeon. He had to protect the child. He made a vow to limit Arpan's media exposure and ensure he had pockets of normalcy, even within the high-stakes world of the hospital. The global attention eventually forced a formal legal and ethical review of Arpan's status. He was too young to be a licensed doctor, yet too gifted to be a mere observer. The situation was unprecedented. A special commission was formed, comprising doctors, lawyers, and child psychologists. The key ethical question was, could a child legally and morally give consent to be placed in an environment of such high responsibility and stress? The lawyers argued about liability. The psychologists worried about emotional development. But the doctors on the panel, many of whom had witnessed Arpan's competence firsthand, argued for the sanctity of life. They showed the commission video evidence of his work, highlighting the lives he had saved or fundamentally improved. The consensus slowly shifted. The commission concluded that Arpan was not being exploited. He was fulfilling a profound, self-identified calling. His intelligence was so far beyond his age that treating him as a typical child was itself a disservice. They established a unique, highly controlled legal status for Arpan. He would be designated as a special medical consultant under the direct, constant supervision of Dr. Menon and the hospital's board. He would be allowed to participate in complex procedures that specifically required his unique dexterity and insight, but only after rigorous review and parental consent for each case. The focus of his work was officially shifted from practice to consultation and assistance. This groundbreaking legal decision set a precedent for handling child geniuses in high-stakes fields. It protected him legally while acknowledging his reality. Arpan Sharma was now officially recognized by the medical establishment. He was no longer just the village healer's son. He was a medical consultant whose name was written in the history books, ready to save the lives that only his golden hands could reach. Despite his new life and international status, Arpan never forgot where he came from. Dr. Menon, recognizing the need for balance, arranged for Arpan to take regular, brief trips back to Lahori. These visits were crucial for grounding the young surgeon. The people of Lahori treated him differently now. They didn't see the famous surgeon, they saw their boy, the one who helped his papa treat broken bones. When Arpan arrived, the village would gather, but not with demands for complicated surgery, only with quiet affection. During one such visit, Arpan found his father, Prakash, looking older and more tired than usual. Prakash was struggling with a complex wound that had become infected. It was a common problem in the village. A lack of sterile supplies and aggressive antibiotics often led to debilitating infections. Prakash had done all he could with his simple herbs and knowledge. Arpan, seeing the severity of the infection, knew exactly what was needed. He didn't have access to the hospital's high-tech equipment, but he had his hands and his knowledge. He spent hours meticulously cleaning the wound, removing every piece of dead tissue, explaining his process to his father as he worked. He spoke about bacterial resistance and the need for a specific, broad-spectrum antibiotic, knowledge far beyond his father's reach. Prakash watched his son work, not as an assistant, but as a student. He realized the immense gap between his simple, traditional healing and the modern science Arpan now commanded. There was no resentment, only deep pride. Arpan wasn't abandoning his roots, he was elevating them. He showed his father new sterilization techniques that could be achieved even with limited resources, integrating his city training with the village reality. The time in Lahori was a constant reminder for Arpan of his purpose, to use his incredible gift not for fame or fortune, but to alleviate suffering, especially for those who had no access to world-class medical care. His return to the village reinforced the simple truth: every life mattered, whether it was a powerful politician or a humble farmer. The soil of Lahori kept the roots of the world's youngest surgeon strong. As Arpan matured, his role in the hospital evolved into something profound. He was still a child, but he began to contribute to the training of adult surgical residents. It was an amusing, often surreal scenario: a tall, bearded resident standing next to a boy on a stool, taking instruction on how to refine a suturing technique. Arpan had an uncanny ability to spot inefficiencies and errors in technique. His small stature meant he saw the surgical field from a different, often clearer, angle. He had a photographic memory for complex anatomical structures and could often predict complications before they arose. Dr. Arpan, the residents would say, using the title out of respect for his skill, not his age. Can you show me how to maneuver around the hepatic duct without unnecessary torque? Arpan would take the tool, his face serious, and perform the maneuver with a grace the resident could only envy. He taught them patience, precision, and respect for the tissue. He was a difficult teacher. He demanded absolute focus and zero complacency, but the residents who trained under him became the best in their class. Dr. Menon, who remained his chief mentor and protector, saw Arpan not just as a surgeon, but as a catalyst for innovation. He pushed Arpan to explore new areas, particularly robotic surgery. Arpan took to the remote controls of the surgical robot instantly. The delicate manipulation required by the robot's tiny instruments perfectly matched his intrinsic skill set, and he didn't even need a stool to operate the console. Arpan helped develop new minimally invasive techniques, using his unique perspective to design smoother pathways for the robotic arms. He was transforming surgical practice, not just by operating, but by thinking differently. His presence challenged the rigid structure of medical training and proved that talent, dedication, and knowledge trumped age every single time. He was no longer just the world's youngest surgeon, he was a pioneer. Years passed. Arpan Sharma continued to save lives, growing slowly, both physically and professionally, under the careful supervision of Dr. Menon and his family. The initial media frenzy calmed, replaced by respectful admiration. He became a fixture in the medical community, a rare, quiet genius who excelled in the most difficult areas of neuro and vascular surgery. He never had a normal childhood, but Arpan himself never felt he missed out. His happiness was found in the perfect closure of an incision, the successful reattachment of a nerve, and the gratitude of a patient whose life he had rebuilt. For Arpan, a quiet day in the operating room was better than any playground. His final major act as a child prodigy came when he turned 16. The Indian government passed a unique, tailor-made resolution, granting him a special, expedited medical license, recognizing his years of practical work and continuous education. He was still years younger than any other fully licensed doctor, but his credentials were now official. Arpan decided to use his unique position to help his home region. He announced the creation of the Arpan Sharma Rural Medical Initiative, a program dedicated to bringing advanced surgical care and training to underserved communities like Lahori. His dream was to ensure that no one would have to bleed out on a dusty road waiting hours for help. Arpan Sharma's story is still being written. He is the quiet doctor who doesn't seek fame, but seeks perfection. The village boy who became a global surgical giant. He stands as a living testament to the fact that passion, focused training, and an undeniable gift can defy all expectations. The boy who stood on a stool, holding a scalpel, became the man who held the future of medicine in his hands. And that is the incredible, true story of Arpan Sharma, the boy whose hands held the weight of human life before he even reached double digits. A 7-year-old who faced down fear, skepticism, and staggering complexity to prove that genius recognizes no age limit. From a dusty village clinic to the world's most advanced operating theaters, Arpan's journey reminds us that the greatest gifts often come in the most unexpected packages. His tale is a challenge to all of us. How much untapped potential lies dormant in the world, just waiting for the right moment to shine? What part of Arpan's journey did you find the most unbelievable? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next incredible story.